Is there a point to all this? Let's find a point. Is this real? Or is this just a ride? The world is like a ride. You think it's real? It's just a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. The world is like a ride. You think it's real? It's just a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. Life goes up and down, round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored. It's up and down, round and round, and it's very loud. Don't worry, don't be afraid. It's just a ride. And we can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. Why are we here?
I think we're part of a greater wisdom than we will ever understand. A higher order. Call it what you want. Know what I call it? The big electron. Whoa, whoa. Whoa, whoa. The big electron. Whoa, whoa. Whoa, whoa. It doesn't punish, doesn't reward. It doesn't judge at all. It just is, and so are we. For a little while.
It is Sunday, January 7th, 2018. Welcome to the new year. Same as the old year, same as the old boss. Welcome, you're in Red Pill Sunday School here on UCY.tv. That is, if we are connected, which, for all intents and purposes, it sounds like we might be. Just trying to get my guest on the line. So you'll have to bear with me. I was trying to do it because I was hoping there'd be some music to allow me to, to do that. So let me try. We're going to try to get Daniel on the line today. We haven't spoken to Daniel in a very long time since, well, heck, I don't even know when the last time that was. So let me see if I can figure this out while I'm talking. That's really hard to do, actually, on this whole Skype thing, because I have to think really hard now. How do I add a person? Shoot. This is the problems with going live, is I don't have any control. I guess it's a good thing. How do I do this? Darn it. Okay, so I'm going to go silent for just a minute here so I can think. So stay with me, folks. Stay with me. Well, okay, I'm having issues here. So, I don't know why it's doing this to me here. I hope, okay, just got the message that I'm live. So, sorry about that, folks. I know you don't like to hear such unprofessionalism. But it's kind of a strange thing to be in the dark and not know whether people are actually hearing you or not. But, Jules assures me that, in her own words, damn it, the intro didn't play. It's okay, Jules, you do so much that, we can forgive you this one time. Just this once, though. Now I gotta figure out how to add, maybe Jules, you can Skype in and tell me how to add someone on Skype. I don't know, for some reason I'm having a blank, and I just can't seem to remember how to do it. It's very strange. Add people or phone numbers. That's not it. Well, shoot. Anyway, I'll have to let my mind kind of get back into this here, since I don't do very many live shows anymore, where I'm in control, which I kind of like. I'll have to think about this and try to connect with Daniel here in some way. What we're going to be talking about today is basically what these conclusions that I've actually reached, and we were going to open up the show talking about the difference between, and the problem with this stuff is, remember, we're talking about fiction. We're talking about fiction, and when you're talking about fiction, you really got to, I'm trying to type and talk at the same time. My apologies, 3-5. You really have to, you have to remember, when we're talking about Bugs Bunny, right? We can't talk about Bugs Bunny in a logical way. You can't talk about fiction in a logical way. You always have to remember you're talking about something that isn't real. It doesn't actually exist in any tangible substance, right? It's just the form of something that's created by man. And when something's created by man like that, the difference between that which is self-evident truth of nature, you can't look at it logically. You can't treat fiction with logic. This is the problem that so many people have out there. When you're talking about money, when you're talking about government, when you're talking about all these different things, stop trying to apply logic to it, folks. It doesn't work. Okay, logic is something that you use to deduce the lie. Once you get to the truth, you don't need it anymore. But to get there, you got to use the logic. You got to use the trivia. But you see, you can't really look at these things in a logical way. You have to say, okay, what's the intent of the creator? What's the intent of he who is trying to get something over on me? What's the intent of the master over the slave? What is the intent of the employer over the employee, the principal over its agent, or the trustee over the trustor over its trustee? What is the intent? What is the purpose of that connection, that contract? That's what you have to look at. That's the only way you're going to ever figure things out. And so one of the questions I always asked, and it was one of the things that Daniel had actually brought up a long time ago, that, Daniel, do we have you on there?
Hello?
Daniel, okay. Sorry, my friend, I was having some technical difficulties, more like a big brain fart. I couldn't remember how to connect someone else on the darn Skype, since it's been so long since I've done a live show like this that I just forgot. My apologies to everyone listening and to you. So how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. It's been a while.
Yeah, well, I wanted to open the show. We're going to talk about what you're going to be doing here in a minute, but I wanted to open the show with this notion. There's something that you brought up a long time ago that always stuck with me, and that's the difference between suicide and execution, both being legal terms. What's so interesting to me is why it's illegal to commit suicide, and yet execution is actually a legal cause of death. And again, I was just saying that you can't think of these things with any kind of logic. This is why you have to learn this language, because, like, to give the same example, Bugs Bunny, we can't look at Bugs Bunny and we can't say, well, why does Bugs Bunny like to eat carrots?
Right.
Is he really eating a carrot, or is that just some fictional thing that he's got that looks like a carrot, but it's not? Right? There's form without substance. And so you can't use logic in these things. You have to go in and actually figure out the intent of the creator of these concepts, right? So I found these really strange, after talking to you and showing that legal execution, which means end of contract. Execution of contract means the life of the contract is now terminated. I found these really interesting maxims of law that you don't really. It's so strange to read them because first one in the Latin it says it is a greater crime to kill oneself than another. How is it a greater crime to kill oneself than another? Why would that be a greater crime, right? Then you read, those things which are properly transacted in our court ought to be committed to a due execution. Wait a minute. Everything in court should be executed? Wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. What's going on here? And that's because we're trying to read these words in the common or the vulgar dog Latin language that we've been taught since birth to keep us common-minded, to keep us so that we can't understand these terms. What is suicide but self-murder, self-destruction, self-slaughter? Well, wait. Why? So that's a greater crime. That's so interesting. And as we get into it, we discover, well, yeah, that's because it's a crime against nature. All things of nature are greater than that of the legal realm. Well, what is an execution? An execution is just the end of a contract, right? When you look at the term life, in Webster's dictionary, it says the life is the execution of a contract. What? Wait. Life is the execution or time it takes to fulfill the performance of a contract. That's life. Wait a minute. Okay, so what's execution? What does it all mean? What does it mean? So I remember talking to you about this, and you had looked up the death statistics and for things that were, reasons why people were declared dead. And I wanted you to start from there.
Yeah, the causes of death. It was in a 1939 physician's handbook that was mailed out to all physicians at that time, especially in the United States, and it was put out by the U.S. Department of Commerce, Department of the Census. And it had a section, and if you read the booklet, and you knew it was legal execution, and I go, legal execution? Are they just talking about like hanging a guy or electrocuting him, so I look at it, and I looked at least on this side of the border for the Canadian law, and the Canadian law, when I looked up legal execution, it said seizure of property. And I go, okay, well, if you don't have any property, you'd be dead.
Yeah.
And I remember a friend of mine going to a lawyer in a municipality that he lived in, and went there and talked to the lawyers, and he was quite concerned about some things that were happening to him in law enforcement regarding his business. And he basically he borrowed a law book based on property, and he returned it on a Monday. Says, "Yep, no one owns any property in this country." And he looked and he said, "Did you just say that no one owns any property in this country?" So he ends up on a journey with me to the Attorney General's office. We go into one of the main lawyers at the Attorney General's office in Ontario, and he asked the lawyer, the head lawyer there, he said, "If I don't own any property according to what a lawyer told me for the township I'm in," he says, "how could I have any debt?" And the lawyer said, "I can't answer that."
Dead pledge, right? Mortgage.
Yeah, it's the crux of the matter. If I don't have any property, technically, well, then I really wouldn't be existing. And so in that world, you don't have that property. So when I look at certain terms we just talked about, and we talked about the word suicide, if you look up in Webster's, now it depends on the version, and I'm just telling you I have a version that I got with an encyclopedia set one year back in the 80s. And in that Webster's dictionary, when I looked up the word custom, and we know you pay customs and duties, right, and taxes and everything on things that are foreign and imported. And so when I looked up the word custom, it said, see costume. And then it said, see suicide. And that floored me because I couldn't put my head around that for the first time reading it. But you see, it's very customary to bear the title of another, especially in a feudal system. To bear the title of a lord, and it's not your name, and it isn't your property. So it wouldn't matter how many times I do something with it. Every time I use it or execute it, it's alienating it from me anyways. It's not mine. So if it's not me and I'm impersonating it, that would be like being an imposter, and that is the root word for imposition, which is the root of the meaning of taxation, which says it's an imposition. It's something imposed. Well, if something's imposed, imposition and imposter is fraud. So basically, I take people into the warning in James chapter 5 out of the good book that's in the courts, and it says that the wealthy hold back the hired hand by fraud. It says they're never paid. Well, how can you pay someone in a title that's not theirs anyways? If it's not theirs, of course the guy controlling the property that's been seized, that's not yours, he's going to be able to collect on it. So it's a massive mess, but I can understand that if I was truthful and I went and took on a title that's not mine, and now it's going to change my whole life and turn me into this, debtor that is the definition for someone who bears a surname, a debtor, well then of course wouldn't that be suicidal to go and put yourself into debt? So there goes he who's surety for a stranger will surely smart for it.
Well, and of course, then the only way to come out of that debt is to execute the performance that debt is based on.
Absolutely.
So to come out of death, you have to be executed. You have to have an execution of the person. So what's interesting about suicide, and I think this is what people miss, is because, of course, like you said, we don't think of the person and the man as two different concepts. We don't think of our status in society. We think of it as us, which is like the image, the self-purported image in the Matrix, right? We appear as what we believe we are. So we believe we're the person, so the status, so that's what we appear as, and we act accordingly. Well, remember, this is all the whole thing is based on money. But more importantly, it's based on insurance. Everything is based on insurance. They put you in what's called danger. You look up danger, it means the jurisdiction of the state, right? That is danger, because if you're not in danger, then there's no reason for insurance. This all goes back to the maritime law of being in danger because you're on the international seas and you're bearing your flag, your arms of the United States or whatever country for your protections, and so that the other country knows you're wanting to trade in international arms, that kind of thing. And it all has to do with insurance. Everything has to do with insurance and reinsurance, being a bet against the insurance. So I ensure that your ship won't sink. And then I say, well, in reinsurance, I'm going to say it is going to sink. So I'm betting against my bet, right? We see that in the stock market all the time. Here's what it says about suicide in Bouvier's 1856. The act of malicious self-murder. Self-murder. You don't ever hear murder being called self-murder, do you? Because when they say murder, it's always of the person. You're murdering property of government. They don't care about the man. Malicious self-murder? In other words, you have to have a intent. And why? Why do you have to have intent? Well, it has been decided in England that where a man's life was insured and the policy contained a proviso that every policy affected by a person on his or her own life should be void if such person commits suicide or die by dueling or the hands of justice, the terms of the condition included all acts of voluntary self-destruction. Voluntary self-destruction. Whether the insured at the time such act was committed, etc., was not a moral responsible agent. So there you go. It's saying, if you're the agent, if you're a moral responsible agent and you commit suicide, hey, we're not going to pay these insurance policies. This is all based on freaking insurance. The insurance of that commercial vessel that you're acting in. And I find that to be disgusting. I don't know. It's something you can't even put
we're on someone else's ship. Basically, what's happening is you're in someone else's vessel. You're taking on the title of another. That was the definition in Black's on Dummy. One who holds legal title for another. Right. And another in law means a stranger, a foreigner. So if that name is foreign to me in reality, well, welcome to the word legal. Because legal is foreign to truth. It works on the supposition of a lie that someone consents to carry. Welcome to the liars. We have a whole society full of guys who swore an oath to that bar. They went from truth into fiction.
Well, they went into a different realm, essentially.
Yes. And so they're not going to give that up because it's been a prosperous, more than not, journey for most of the people that are in the legal part of it because it controls every aspect of every movement. And therefore, it's an economic tracker. Which we talked about the other day when I basically was telling you about that Cambridge Yale, but I think you may have got that email from me that carried that PDF that we put together on that study done on the legal identities, and then basically it was dealing with the whole subject of the family surname, the permanent family surname, and it went into how much they've tried to impose this, especially in areas where people never had one. So I really call the insurance more like in surnaments. Because that would be more accurate. So you can't do anything. You see, anything that's not legal is automatically illegal, but we've been taught illegal is bad. But you see, you were illegal before you became legal. They legalized you to use something that's not yours under permission to break the law by license, so you can pay for an infringement trespass.
That's like saying ill Satan. Well, how do you have bad Satan?
Yeah. So
illegal? How do you have bad legal?
Yeah. So illegal is actually not a bad thing, but in the context of the way most people see the word illegal, it is illegal, of course, to use something that doesn't belong to you, okay, and even in that world, without paying the fee or the fine or consent or following all the rules that go with it. But if I don't have it, I would have to be illegal to begin with because I'm playing in legal. So I'm being legalized because that's going into economics right off the top, because legalization has really got to do with economics.
Well, you're being... It's being published, essentially, is what it really means.
Yeah, it's the same thing on anything that goes on out there. Okay, you can have a dog, but in the legal, you need to have a tag on the dog, but the dog wouldn't have a tag. Okay, but because you're dealing with, at least on this side, if we want to look at it, the British Empire colonialism, which has to do with the colony, where you get yourself into the crap. The whole thing was, if you didn't have permission while you were playing in that perversion of law. It's a perversion of law. It's not real. It's a perversion of what you think is law. And therefore you'll go into the pound, which is the money, every time you do something wrong, and especially they really can't stand it if you get arrested for doing what's right and you end up in the pound without a tag, because then they don't know what to do with you because they can't ID you in their make-believe idolatry. So they've got a whole system that's all based on it. They weigh you up in pounds, and when you're born, and then they weigh you up at the end. And I'm sure there's a huge mathematical equation going on, and there's a reason why that coroner does that. They weigh you at birth, and they weigh you at the end.
Well, so let's talk about the root word here, sui.
Yeah.
Right? To be sui juris is to be one who has all the rights to which a free man is entitled. A freeman is not necessarily a good word. Like I said, it's like being a rat in a cage, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
We're all freemen of the city means you're the jurisdiction of the city. It's not a good word because, remember, it's legal, which means it's the opposite of good. One who is not under the power of another as a slave, a minor, and the like. Now, again, don't be confused. Being not under the power of another just means the immediate power. That just means that you're not under the absolute power. You have quote-unquote freedom, franchise to make your own way in the slave colony is basically what it means. To make a valid contract, a person must in general be sui juris, right? Everyone of full age is presumed to be sui juris. So all of us out here, all as citizens, are presumed to be, and what that really means is that we have not the knowledge. We don't know the law. We don't know, but we have the ability. We have the capability. There's another word I'm missing. It's a good word. Something that means you can be filled, but you're not necessarily filled, right? You can have the law. You can know it. Doesn't necessarily mean you do, right? So that's the sui juris. And most of us sit out here and we have the capacity to know the law, but we don't. And we make all these mistakes because of this. We don't know the language, so we can't know the law. It's that simple. So what is it, if you're sui juris, okay, well then what does it mean to suicide? You're killing that self that has, it's a reference to the man, but they never say the man. It's a reference to the man who has his mental faculties and is able to be self-governing, but chooses not to, is the best way that I can put it. We can self-govern, we can follow the Bible, we can even be private citizens under private law, but we choose not to because we choose to be free men and get the benefits and protections and safeties and securities that will ultimately destroy us. And therefore we are sui juris. And so suicide is basically the killing of the self, right? The malicious malcontent of the self, which is that sui, that word sui. It's a hard word to put into context.
No, it's very difficult. I can understand when people listening in on us are probably sometimes having a hard time getting their head around it, and I kind of watch when I'm and I know you go through the same thing when you're explaining something. It can be almost like a deer in the headlights look, because once you've been imprinted to think in a certain pattern, and that's where the concern is. But we've used words our entire life. We never knew what most of them meant. They're very powerful. Words is everything. We do everything by word. And then we write those words down, and then we sign to those words, and then we go, why is this happening to me? But if you don't comprehend the meanings of those, you're going to be on a very lost journey, and especially in legal, because the civil law, which really means I have to take it down a direction that it never meant a good thing. It meant you were like some heathen barbarian, and civil meant that. It meant that you would act like an animal because you would do things that you'd be demanded to do, but you would be in a contract that you volunteered into because they had your consent, and you volunteered to do bad. So the civil not only is economic, but it also, leads to this idea of the state can demand you to do anything, and you better follow through on it, whether it's unconscionable or not. So the whole thing is unconscionable because in reality, we're operating in a complete lie by consent. And that's where the danger comes in. So having legal rights is a big problem.
We're executing the lie. That is the execution of the contract. Literally, we are executing the lie.
And that comes with a debt, because truth in itself is foreign to fiction, and fiction's foreign to truth. So typically, the reason why the last name in the state means a debt or a debtor is because you're always obligated. You're on a treadmill of debt, and you can't pay debt with debt, so you're just always in debt. And you have no way to recover yourself from it. You have no hope. There is no such thing as really a remedy while you're playing in the mire of that, because you've automatically consented to volunteer into debt and carry a debtor name.
And the problem is we don't understand the notion of debt, because again, we always think of debt as a monetary thing, but I can remember citizenship is a performance debt. In other words, you're signing a contract to perform a certain way, which is why the AI scares me so much, by the way, just as an offshoot. The artificial intelligence, as soon as we are under that, where we're performing for the computer. Like, it's already given us Bitcoin and all these different blockchains of things. It's already making us do all these different things for its power and its learning, ability. Once we go down that road, it's going to be very scary. But the point is, so they've got all their bases covered, because the master is the maxim of law is that the master is liable for the injuries done by his servant. So if I have slaves, if I have voluntary subjects such as us, if I'm the United States, if I'm the corporation that Congress created to hold all of its slaves, voluntary slaves, its subjects, and I have to make it so that, hey, all the things that my subjects do, if I'm liable for them, well then how am I going to possibly stay afloat as a corporation, stay always ahead in the red? And that's where insurance comes in, right? If the master is liable for any injury done by his servant, well, why do you think they have insurance? Anything you do then will be insured. So government's going to win whether you harm somebody or you don't, or you're harmed. It's going to win no matter what, because of course it's the creator and beneficiary of all insurance policies, ultimately, because remember, we have no property, so any money we have is ultimately government's, right?
Remember,
and this goes back
that's exactly right.
Yeah, it goes back to the notion that man will ultimately be governed by God or by tyrants. That's Benjamin Franklin. Freedom is not a gift bestowed upon us by other men, but a right that belongs to us by the laws of God and nature. That's Benjamin Franklin. Every step we take towards making the state our caretaker of our lives, by that much we move toward making the state our master. Dwight D. Eisenhower said that. So, folks, you've got presidents of the freaking whole corporation, the whole United States, telling you you're either going to be governed by God, the Bible, the laws of nature, or you're going to be governed by men, by the state, by this corporate structure that they create. And as you said in the beginning, Daniel, this is what people have missed. Was the great revelation to me when I was writing this book. These nations, which means literally to be born in or to be a goyim in the nation, they're not territory, they're not land, they're not of the terra, they're a status, they're fake, they're not real. We're in a territory or a jurisdiction, we're not in the territory. And so in other words, we're on a monopoly board. We're in a feudal system and we don't even know it. We're in a contractually created feudal system. The names, the words have changed, but the truth is that we're all stuck in a feudal system. Why? Because man will ultimately be governed by God or by tyrants. If we don't have the knowledge of this language and these things that we're talking about, then we will be ruled by these tyrants. The very tyrant that made these damn quotes.
Absolutely. There's so many warnings throughout that whole book that people say by coincidence is in the courts. We'll talk about the word coincidence in a second, but coincide. I think side is in there too, right? On coincide. But the interesting thing about the message that goes out through that, the book of Proverbs gives major warnings. Do not put your trust in nobles or the princes of men. When you become a United States citizen, surprisingly, okay, now this would be, probably extremely shocking, like a polar plunge right now. So I guess I was in Boston. I think it'd be a polar plunge into ice-cold water of truth, to realize that when you become an American, which in Oxford's dictionary, which was there before Webster's, with 22 volumes of words, and how you use those words to show the meaning, it defined the term American and even the term Italian as a Gentile terminology.
Gentile.
So it was Gentile, and that meant you were of the nations that did not know the true God. That's what it meant. You were of an uncovenanted nation that doesn't know who your creator is, and therefore you're going to be part of this tyranny that we're talking about because we've now consented to do or be under something that's not right. So
you've consented to fraud. You're in a contract that literally causes you to perform against the laws of God and nature. You're in a fraud. You are part of the tyranny, whether you like it or not, whether you admit to it or not. And John Adams, another president, from the works of John Adams, 1851, he said our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Okay, here's your president, again, one of those father figures. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. That tells you right there, you must be self-governing in order to even have a piece or protection from that document, which again only protects your negative rights, which means it protects your right to be self-governing. Right? It doesn't protect you if you're governed, if you're part of the tyranny, if you're a subject of the United States. The Constitution does nothing for you because you're not moral. You're acting in fraud, and this doesn't go through to people. I don't know why.
Well, and another thing too is I think because there's a very very strong probably indication of people in the United States who are very pro that the United States is a Christian country. Which would be a completely oxymoron, considering we just said that the term American means you're a Gentile, which means you're a pagan. So I don't like taking on those kind of, that in on label, but I'm just leaving it that. And when you swear an allegiance into the United States, the oath is that you must completely renounce any and all allegiance to a foreign prince. Yeah. Well, if they're Christian, Jesus Christ was considered to be a Prince of Peace. So therefore, to be an American, you'd have to renounce him to begin with. And now there's all these Christians saying, man, our rights are being violated. I'm going, give me a break. Are you that lost?
Yeah, well, so there again. I say I'm a Christian, but that's a flattering title. The Bible says don't take flattering titles. If you're going to be a Christian, act like one. That's the only way you're going to get protection from the Constitution.
Absolutely.
Is if you act
just take it on as a thought. It's got to be, because even when they defined Christianity, it said it was the state of being a Christian, which means it is a jurisdiction. It's juris right and diction right. Now, therefore, if I'm going to talk right, what was the message? He was talking about truth. He was talking about peace. He was talking about all the good things that we don't seem to be experiencing out there, and then they kill them. So, I'm just saying, it's just kind of crazy that you will see a whole group of people who mingle in, and what I call it is commercial worship. They've entered into a commercial worship, which is oxymoron to spirituality, because there's no way you can mix the two things together. We may try to do it, we may rationalize it, and I got into I'm not trying to go too much off subject on this, but it was just an interesting thing that it was a United States website. Someone sent me it was something I looked up, and then I ended up staying on there. You know what happens once you punch into someone's coordinate, they'll keep on sending you emails. And I thought the first thing that I'd found on their site was pretty accurate, but everything after that wasn't. And so they kept on sending me things, so I started to speak to some of their hierarchy. And I found that, of course, that I basically was talking to commercial worshipers. And in it, they can't explain reason anymore. They're not reasoning, they're rationalizing. Okay? And rationalization is a really crazy word, because that's part of how the legal system operates. We rationalize doing wrong. And then we say, this is the reason why I do it. So we rationalize it till it becomes right, but it's wrong. And you can rationalize wrong as much as you want, but it isn't right.
That's your logical fallacy.
Yeah, so in the whole rationalization, I asked them, could you please explain to me Matthew 6, verse 24? I said, you got the good book there. You guys are supposedly preaching the message from your leader, and you're saying your leader is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he said you cannot serve God and mammon. And they go, oh no, it just means you can't concentrate on money. I said, no, they put the Greek word mammon there to represent that mammon was going to have a very diabolical feel to it, because mammon meant it was a pagan god of the Greeks, where they coined money. And then the Romans had the same version. They called it Juno. And in Canada, we have the Juno Awards.
Yeah.
So I know that Canada's got to be pretty pagan, because that's what goes with the territory with using that word. So anyways, when I said, if I said you can't serve John and basically Fred, you wouldn't say, oh no, it didn't mean I can't serve Fred. It meant I just couldn't concentrate on serving Fred while I'm serving John. I said, are you out of your head? It says you cannot serve God, spiritual, nature, reality, and artificial. It just won't work. So it says you cannot. So it didn't say you must not. It says you cannot, which makes it an entire impossibility. The word cannot makes it impossible. Now, if I make it possible, that means I'm consenting to do something that otherwise in truth would be impossible to do. Okay, but truth cannot lie.
Well, so
truth mixed with error will walk into a lie. So
absolutely.
The problem is, this is what's going on, and I think we're kind of surrounded with the largest amount of confusion worldwide that's been so imprinted so long, Clint, that I don't know if they will wake up from their delusion.
Again, my favorite part is Matthew 6. Before it actually says the Lord's Prayer, it tells you how to pray it. It says in Matthew 6:5, it says, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father who is in secret, and thy Father who seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. In other words, You're not supposed to worship publicly. Publicly
Right.
is what, that's the same word as worshiping civilly. Civil, public, any other words you want to attach to there. The worst kind of men are always the best dressed and in the front row of church every Sunday to show you how wonderfully civil and publicly worshiping of God they are. It's a ruse. It's false. This is why you're not to do this. This is why the Bible specifically says, do not stand up in church and chant the Lord's Prayer. It means nothing. You must pray. You must commune with nature. You must commune with God. You can't do it in public. Now let me read you some other things here that might, make you understand why these churches were actually created. How about public worship, right? Do we find
money changing in thy temple?
Yeah, well, what happens when we look at public worship? When we look, let's see. Here's the Articles of Incorporation for the LDS Church. President, 1923 and 1943. Here's what it says. It says, we're creating this Church of the Latter-day Saints, etc., a religious society for the benefit of religion, for the works of charity, and for public worship, under and pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 3, Title 19 of the Complaud Laws of Utah.
Oh, my goodness.
And all acts amendatory thereof. So we're creating public worship, which the Bible tells you not to do. What's their justification? Well, if we don't follow the laws of Utah, which are the laws of the United States, they'll come in and shut us down. So God, i.e. the president of the Mormon Church, has a revelation, and suddenly blacks are welcomed into the church. They don't no longer have the mark of Cain. They're now welcomed into the priesthood, etc., etc., etc. It's false. It's public worship, the very thing you're not supposed to do. But let's not stop there. Who else does public worship? Catholic Press. In Sydney, August 25th, 1900, it says Sunday is a Catholic institution, and its claims to observance can be defended only on Catholic principles. That's not principles of the Bible, that's the principles of the Catholic Church, i.e. corporation. From the beginning to the end of Scripture, there is not a single passage which warrants the transfer of weekly public worship from the last day of the week to the first. Public worship. Public worship. Sunday is not founded on Scripture, but on tradition. And it is a distinctly Catholic institution. That's right out of the Catholic record in 1893.
It's pretty heavy for most people to come to a realization that what they've been caught in, and they feel duped, so they'd rather... what I found more now when I'm speaking to especially those that are actually operating, administrating these organizations, I said, well, if you are saying you're a follower of something, it's pretty straightforward. So if I'm Canadian, then I'm the property of Canada. If I'm American, I'm the property of America. I'm not my own. I'm something else now. If I'm a member of the Boy Scouts, then I'm a Boy Scout member. So it's pretty simple. Now, if these guys are claiming that they're Christians, I said, well, if you're a Christian, well, then you're the property of Christ then. I said, you can't be the property of another.
But I'm an American.
If you're in the public, you're not private.
I'm an American Christian.
That's an oxymoron in itself.
I'm a Christian in America. Wait, how can that be? Wait, I'm a Christian in a corporation called the Mormon. No, wait, that can't be either. Something's wrong here. Something's not making sense.
I got it. I'm a truthful liar.
Yes, that's the truth. The lie is the truth. And you know what? The Bible's like real clear. It's real simple. Jesus Christ answered and said unto them, why do you also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? By your tradition. Thus have ye made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition. What's he talking about? He's talking about church, he's talking about religion, he's talking about law, he's talking about all the things that we do that are opposed to the Bible. Ye hypocrites, he says, right? I mean, their heart is far from me, but in vain They do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. What happens in the Mormon church? They teach the Mormon books. What happens in the Catholic Church? They teach the Catechism and the Catholic books. There's no Bible there. These are the doctrines of men.
That's right. So in tradition has the root word of trade in it. And trade leads to the word trap. So when you walk into it, if you've traded truth for non-reality, somebody's version of something, look at even when Jesus was out there, he takes Levi, who was a tax collector, and he turns him into Matthew. Now Matthew's not Levi, it's a publican anymore. He's not a tax collector. He didn't ask him to send a resignation notice. He told him to leave. Come with me. So he just left. He didn't send a resignation because resignation is different than renunciation. So you don't want to be resigned because you're going to be very frustrated.
And this is where the problem lies, because what do all these churches actually follow? Why did the Mormon Church have this part of its doctrine? Because of Title 18 of Utah Code. In other words, it's telling you to follow the law of the land, not the law of man, not the law of God. All religions tell you to follow the law of men. They have to, because they're corporations of men.
Tax worship. It's tax collecting worship, and they're allowed to have a portion of the tax in order to operate. But that's the problem. They're in something they should never have been in, because spirituality has nothing to do with money.
And what's
it's not natural. It doesn't grow on trees. But Clint, if it does grow on trees, you and I go collect it together. And if someone says that we can go collect it off that tree, we'll give it to them.
Well,
it doesn't grow on trees.
If it grew
so they got to enter into a contract to receive it.
If it grew on trees, it'd be about as legal to grow as marijuana. Or maybe,
and that's a whole other subject.
Maybe opium or something, right? But so, yeah, that's what amazes me the most is because, you and I, the one thing we all have in common, I don't care what part of the United Kingdom, as they call it, if you're in Canada, you're in Australia, you're in quote unquote America, the English common law was transferred, and the basis, the foundation, the very structure of the common law is the Bible. It's even copyrighted, published property of the Crown, right? I mean, they say it is, of course. Their version, the King James version, is what I mean. So it's literally it's said in our court cases and in English court cases that it is that is the law. It used to be illegal to speak poorly or badly about characters of the Bible like Jesus Christ or God, because you weren't just saying, it wasn't because you were talking badly about religion. They didn't care about religion. What they cared about was that you were talking poorly about the very structure and foundation of the law. By talking ill or poor-mannered about Jesus Christ, you would go to jail. This is actually the society that I would like to live in. And we say, oh my God, that's so outdated. And now I realize, holy shit, they had it right, man. They had it right because they knew back then that it was the law. They didn't think it was just a ridiculous, foolish religion that's being taken literally, and all these fools walking around calling themselves Christians. No, man, they knew it was the law. And if you would never go out in public and do what people are doing today, and just completely taking a big giant dump on the forehead of all possibility of understanding the Bible and the characters within, right? That back then, even in the laws of Philadelphia, etc., man, those people would be in jail. They would be kicked out of society. Is the point? They would be in jail. You'd be banished. You'd be gone. You would have no respect. And to think, man, that's the foundation of our law. You want to know why we are so lost, why we're so completely dumbfounded by the way things are working in our country, why our Congress is so corrupt, why everything is so bad. You now have the answer right here. It's because we've chosen our law, and our law is not the same law that it was founded to be.
Yeah, in order to operate in the imaginations of men, and that's also, Warren, that's also a little code in Scripture. It says, to be concerned about, the imaginations of men. Don't be part of them. It says that actually truth will tear it down, will tear down the imaginations of men. It's that powerful.
That's the tree of good and evil, right? The tree of
right. And the Ten Commandments are quite straightforward. When you look at them, every one of them is violated by operating in the legal system.
But I'm a Christian.
Every one of them.
But I'm a Christian. I'm a card-carrying Christian.
Yes. And they don't realize that I know there's a neat little thing, and I think you may have talked about it way back when, but the only certificate that you can probably research that ever occurred in the Roman civil system that was ever issued, okay, was a certificate that acknowledged that someone who was a follower of truth through the gospel truth of Christ actually had basically made and turned over and committed heresy against truth and went into a pagan sacrifice and was calling Caesar a god. And it was called a libellus. You did something libelous. You actually were making honors to men instead of to the Creator. So you got a certificate that said you did that sacrifice.
And we're doing the same because essentially Caesar and
that's what all those birth certificates are issued for. They are actually libelous against truth and what is natural and what is good and what is moral, because that's the document that implies imp, devil, and then lies, implies, suggests, makes a supposition that you are the property of Caesar. That's a cesarean birth, not a natural birth.
Well, and see, in my research, I found that the word Caesar and the word district are the same meaning. So we have a district of Columbia, New Columbia, right? So we're all basically, we need to render back to Caesar what is Caesar's. We need to render back to the District of Columbia, the United States, i.e., where the seat of government is, the creator of all births, of all legal entities, right? The holding company. We need to render back to that version of Caesar. What is Caesar's? We're all seized. We're in distress and distraint, which is the meaning of district, under for us anyway, here in America, quote unquote. We're not Americans. We're under Caesar. That's not America. America is the land. We're in a nationality which has nothing to do with the land. And this is our problem. We don't know this. We don't realize this. We've all been stuck under this system that is completely opposed to the foundation of law, which is the Bible. And right now, a lot of people are doing exactly what I said they shouldn't. They're trying to apply logic and reason. They don't want to believe all this. They don't want to believe that they can't call themselves a Christian unless they're truly acting the part. That by being a citizen of any nation, that they are not the people. They're not the bloodlines that created this. It's that you don't have any land, you don't have any property. See, nobody wants to come down from the romanticism and the ease that it causes to believe that we're something we're not. You see, and I find that to be a very, very difficult wall to break, that logic wall, right? That logic, the false logic, the fallacy of all these.
It's a crazy word, that word logic, because it's logistics. It sounds like it's dealing with reason, but it's just dealing with some kind of like procedural, robotic understanding that goes on in it, but it doesn't mean it's real. It's just some kind of make-believe procedural.
It's only as good as your grammar, and your grammar is only good as your language skills, your understanding of language. Every book that you read, you better know the intention of the author. Is he writing it in the common language, the legal language, the king's language, the higher language? Is he writing it is it translated from a foreign language? Do you even know a foreign language, right? Do you know? So your logic is worthless, is really what we're saying in this system, because the intention of the authors is never for you to understand anything they're saying by writing it in the common language, which sounds exactly like the legal language, or writing it in the legal language, which is sounds the same as the common language. You can never have these kinds of concepts behind you, these foundational things that we're talking about, because you're not meant to. all your grammar is adversarial. It's you can call it satanic. It just means adversarial. It's adversarial to knowledge. It's adversarial to law. Everything has been set up to be adversarial to your understanding of the Bible. And I can't tell you how important that is. Even the fact that you will go to church this Sunday, and when the preacher, the employee who's being paid in mammon, who would never do this job as a charity. No, 70,000 plus a pension and retirement, right? Plus a living expense, right? That's the only way. That's the only way I'm going to be your preacher here in this United Methodist Corporation church, right? You have to pay the corporation, not me, and they pay me, and right? They're not going to. No preacher is going to is going to do that for charitable purposes and not be paid.
No,
that's how you know. That's how you know they're fake. And you're gonna stand up on their command, and you're gonna say in public worship, which is against the Bible, against what it says in the very paragraph before it has the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6. And you're going to go against the Bible by chanting the Lord's Prayer in public, chanting it as if that means anything. You sound like a frickin' cult. You always have since I was a kid.
No, it's I was actually just kind of refreshing myself on something you and I we had one conversation on the air before, and I was explaining that when we're looking at the Genesis account, and I said take it literal or symbolic. I can work it both ways, but when the first pair in the Genesis account ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I'll call evil a lie, fiction. They, insinuate Adam and Eve when the master came in to find out what had happened when the captain had committed mutiny with the first mate on the ship. And insinuate, and I'm going through the Black's 10th current edition. And I'm going, I don't know if there's anything interesting in there, just out of browsing. And when I'm in there, I find out that there is a term that deals with the whole registry of a birth or an instrument that goes into the public register. And register means to betray. Remember, Jesus was betrayed into the public, but he wasn't part of the public. They try to make him part of the public. And so there's a term called, and you're going to laugh at this, Clint. It's in the 10th edition. It's been in probably previous editions. I don't know how I never saw it. But it's called insinuar. Insinuar. It's spelled I-N-S-I-N-U and then A-R-E. Insinuar. And it means in civil law, money law, armed force law, to register, to deposit an instrument with a public register. So I think we got the message. In sin you are, because sin means debt, so in debt you are. And I'm going to give you a debtor title name so you can walk around and be the debtor. Doesn't that make sense? And then you'll be the dummy, according to Black's law.
Well, yeah, sin. The word sin is one that I have a lot in my second edition of this thing I've been reading, and it comes from SYNN. So, yeah, it's a debt. But see, the problem with anything that is a debt is that there is no such thing as a debt. It's all, there's no real debt. In other words, it doesn't grow on trees. You can't pull it from the earth. Yeah. There's no, right? So a debt is always a false condition, basically. So again, it's from the tree of the concepts of good and evil, of knowledge, of false knowledge, a lie. So the word sin is actually SYN. And think about the words that start with sin or SYN, synthetic, right? Synagogue, sin this and sin this, right? They're all things that are artificial or false. And that's the point, is sin is always something that is not, it's always dwelling in something that's not real. If you're dwelling in religion, well, guess what? The word dwell means trickery and deceit.
Right.
See, so we the language has entrapped us. Oh, yes, where's your dwelling? My dwelling is at 10427 this street in, Highland, Montana. Oh, okay. That's your dwelling, huh? That's where you've been tricked into believing you exist as a fictional entity? That's your dwelling?
That's your
dwelling?
post address.
Where are you
address?
Where are you a Christian? Oh, I'm a Christian at this federal address for this corporation calling itself a church. That's where I dwell as a Christian. Oh, really? So that's your denomination. You've been denominated to that status.
What's happened too is because there's, when they're reading Paul's words, and a lot of these, I hate to tell you, these 501c3 registered religions in the United States, what they're doing is they've entered something spiritual or something that's supposed to be spiritual, very pure, which is opposite to secular. It's the opposite word to secular. And then they've entered into secular and they say, no, that's the way it's supposed to be. And we need that. And that's the way it's going to operate. Well, that's all they've ever known. That's what they've been told, and someone keeps on telling them, and you'll always find a lawyer operating these churches. And when you realize that even the word church comes from the word kirk, which has nothing to do with an actual real temple or a spiritual place, it's representing actually some kind of like heathen Roman circus-like meaning. So it has nothing to do with what they think, but they use it, and they follow a false direction on it, and you cannot get them out of that because they've already mixed and merged two things that don't belong together and mingled them, and now the confusion begins because that is confusion. When you take something that's truthful and something that's in error and you mix it together, even though it may look like you merged it, it's still error. It's not truth anymore. And that's why Pontius even said to Jesus, what is truth? Well, why would Pontius say that? Why would he say what is truth? Because the Romans were professional liars. Romance means to lie. That's what it means. Romance in its 1755 Samuel Johnson dictionary means to lie. It's a fiction. It's not truthful. So they told stories of love and war. So you have to have a love name on one side and a war name on the other side of the name. And you merge the two together, and now you have stories of love and war. And so that's how the system operates. And then you've got you've got these organizations that are denominations. You said they're economic denominations. They've come up with labels. Like, which one would you believe? Is it going to be the Methodists, the United Church? Is it going to be Catholics? Is it going to be Baptists? And they're all believing they've got it. And I go, you guys are the most divided I've ever seen. If I wanted the most confusion, I'd be going to the legal denominations.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. So wait a minute. Well, what does the word kirk mean again?
It comes from the word almost like a Roman circus.
So
it's like an entertainment. It's not real. It's got nothing to do with where the Greek word ecclesia came from, which was just to congregate together people that are spiritual. It had nothing to do with a man-made building, and that's why when Christ was speaking, he said, God does not reside in any man-made temple.
Right.
He said, you are the temple. Oh, that was going to really piss off those Pharisees, those scribes, who were already money changing in the people's temples.
So, in other words, Captain Kirk flew the USS Enterprise, which is when in the Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports, that's of course where they put most of the money is in the enterprise funds for financial investment, right? So the Enterprise goes through the galaxy and causes or forces people to join the Federation or Confederation, which means conspiracy or combination. Wow, hey, yeah, isn't that fun? And then they come upon the Borg, which means the common or middle class people, the bourgeoisie. Oh man, and you saw how they portrayed us as the Borg,
and
right?
Then Spock. Then you have even a Dr. Spock, but you had Spock, and he was what? He said everything was logical.
Right.
And he had no emotions, no conscience on anything. He just thought logically. And he was right beside Captain Kirk on the ship. from the planet Vault.
That's like Wormtongue being right by the king in The Lord of the Rings, or countless other stories. It's just because, hey, let's start from the beginning here, Daniel.
Okay.
Hi, Daniel. Welcome to the show. So glad you could join me. Folks, I'd like to introduce you to Daniel. He's up in the Toronto area in an undisclosed location with lots of acreage and beautiful land. He has done some wonderful things, and he's been on my show, which was on RBN quite a bit in 2014 and 2015. Yes, it's now 2018. Holy crap. And I wanted to bring Daniel on, not just because people are always asking me to bring Daniel on, but also because, Daniel is hosting a function that's going to be happening in Toronto here January 13th, and I wanted you to tell people about that before I forget and just get so caught up in all this minutia that we lose. It's called Truth versus Fiction. The Law. Is There Any Remedy? And this is Saturday, January 13th, 2018, from 1 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. Can I give the address, or is that?
You can give the address. That's not a problem.
65 Martin Ross Avenue, Unit 1, at the side door, North York, Toronto, Ontario. That's 65 Martin Ross Avenue, Unit 1, North York, Toronto, Ontario. And it's sort of there's going to be a couple of speakers. So why don't you tell people about that?
Yeah, we've, I guess over the years, you make contacts and people that I think they're doing their best in the moment for where they're at. And I think there's still people that maybe believe that there is an ability to still function in there. So we have one speaker that he's quite well versed in what is common law and the difference between, in distinction to statute law, and where all the problems happen in the courts when that's going on. So he's very good at explaining how to basically, at least from his perspective, what he's experienced, how to operate strictly in common law, and to remove that problem that could happen in there quite quickly, where they're going to, immediately go into that civil statute law, and then you're finished. You're done in seconds. We have someone else who's been following. He's a member of a history society I guess it's a history economic society, and it's got a very small membership, but they basically follow and look into the historical records of economics, what's been going on in the world, and he's going to be speaking regarding what went on with there's a case in Canada dealing with a lawyer who surprisingly went after the Bank of Canada for basically selling out the people in Canada that supposedly were supposed to, be benefiting from the Bank of Canada, not being penalized by it. So he went after that, and it didn't get a lot of coverage. Surprisingly, a lot of media block out a lot of things that didn't get covered. But he's going to be doing. He actually this lawyer actually was quite successful, even to the point of even removing a Supreme Court justice off the bench. So he was a former Crown prosecutor, and he basically, I think, if you look at the where the speaker's coming from, he's an interested party, part of that historical society, who's actually watching from the outside edge, but he's been following what's been called the Comer Commission, which is COMER. So people can look that up, and it's kind of like a watchdog organization on economics.
Comer Committee, is that what it is?
Yes, and so they're basically supposed to be a little bit, I guess, of a watchdog, seeing what's going on. But they did follow this thing with the Bank of Canada, and so one of the speakers will be dealing with will have a PowerPoint presentation, which will explain what went on this, because I think it's good for, even though the audience may not be where we're talking right now, may not be on the Canadian side of the border, we're still dealing with of course, this what is the Bank of Canada? Is it a private enterprise? Is it a Federal Reserve Bank? Why is it doing what it's doing? And it appears that someone, surprisingly from the legal side, decided to give a little bit of trouble to that and started to investigate in that it basically didn't follow what it was supposed to be doing. So, anyways, it'll be a very, I think, a very good coverage to give people an update on that. And two of the speakers actually are quite familiar with it. That the main speaker that'll be dealing with that has been watching it from I guess I'd say an educated viewpoint from what is supposed to govern these banks.
Well, so wait. Are you trying to tell me that there's a government agency out there that is not following its charter?
I believe so.
No, come on.
I believe so. Do not put your trust in nobles or the princes.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of sad, but I think that what's kind of the direction of that, even though I myself, if I had to say would I spend time on that, I would go no, because I'm not fooled. I wouldn't even look for goodness in such a scene, because I know that when there's power, there's corruption. And when you give someone that power and then you start dealing with money, well, then there's people on the take. And as long as people are on the take on the money, how do you trust it? How do you trust how do you trust basically a judge when you know someone could pay him off? How do you trust a police officer who could be paid not to show up to court because he's going to get paid overly well for not showing up on something that could remove someone's driver's license? And so, I mean, and Canada has got a terrible, vision of this. I don't know what happens in the States, but we have all these retired officers now opening up franchises of, in the past I used to give you a ticket. Now I'm an expert on how to get you off that ticket. And I'm going, hold on a second here. Before I was trafficking in the Highway Traffic Act in Canada or Ontario, but now you as the officer used to penalize me with a ticket. Now you're going to get me off the ticket as long as I pay you $300-400 to get me off that ticket.
So same thing as.
And I'm going, there's something that's not right with that.
Well, they're just
drunk driving.
They're just getting into the, they're becoming middle management is all. Before they were just revenue collection, but now they're collecting for themselves.
Yeah, so I mean, now the new retirement fund for most of the officers, of course. I mean, and all I can say is that this whole thing. I mean, we look at the word traffic. It's commercial traffic. It's trafficking in something that we don't really have right to. So the whole thing on everything we've been talking about for years on the air before on Corporation Nation and then up to date is it's trafficking in this legal economic title that we don't own, and of course we're going to get penalized for it. How could we ever find relief or any remedy in reality? How can we find a reality or a remedy in a lie?
Well,
truth will set you free, not a lie.
Yeah, so, I mean, there is a reason that they say, and remember, when I say this, I'm not being religious in any way. I'm saying Christ is the Redeemer. I'm saying Christ, i.e. the law of God, is your Redeemer. Yeah. That's the only redemption you're ever going to find. There's no remedy in mammon. There's no remedy in fiction. I just, if people could just grasp that, take the religious aspect out of it and just say, look, what does that mean that Christ is the Redeemer? Well, Christ is the personification, literally, whether you believe he existed or not. He literally is the example you're supposed to follow the law of God. You're not to worship Christ as God. He's sitting there praying to God, praying to his Father, completely helpless in front of his Father, which is Jehovah, God. So you can't pray to Christ as God like the church tells you to. No, you're supposed to follow Christ. And it says we're all to become sons of God, not big S, but little s. That's what the Bible tells us, right? So we're all supposed to become, i.e. Christ-like. That's what the return of Christ means, folks. The return of Christ is when the law of God comes back into our hearts, the law of nature, as they call it. This is the beautiful allegory a beautiful metaphor. And again, if you want to take it literally, that's fine, but don't lose
it still
the
works.
fact.
I think when people are, it's not a barrier. I think that if people think that, like I said, if they're going to take it literally or symbolically, the message still comes out strong and clear. So if you're in, it was a noted terminology that at the time of Caesar, these Caesars, if you were the property of Caesar, you were called Caesarians.
Yes, that's.
If you were the property, and he was called son of a god, because the belief of the Romans were that all the Caesars were birthed from a god, one of their gods. So, and of course, a make-believe, nothing based on anything that would really be spiritual. It was almost like man kind of going in a degraded state. You might as well carve, a piece of wood and bow down to it, and believe that it's real, and now that's your god. Sure. And that's why there's there's actually examples of those wordings in Scripture. But
and now we have
Caesarians. They believe that. They believe that that Caesar was son of a god. When Christ came and he was talking to the audience, he was noted as son of God, the God. So in other words, we're all sons of the Creator. So what a mess.
So what does Caesar do? Well, why did they call this interference of the natural birthing process? Why did they call it a cesarean section? Because you're seizing the baby from its natural course under God and in nature, right? So you call it a cesarean section. That only makes sense when you understand the history and you understand the word itself, to put something to seize or to put something in distress or distraint. That is what Caesar or the district does to all children. This is not a joke. This is the problem that we have in our culture, is that we've been blinded. We've had blinders put on us so that we don't respect poetry. We don't respect metaphor. And yes, you cannot know the metaphoric term of something unless you know the real. So as believing in the literal aspect is fine, but don't forget that there's always a metaphoric meaning to these things, because if you don't understand the metaphor, you don't understand, and you take it literally, or only metaphorically, then you're going to miss some aspect of it, and you're going to fall into the trap. You have to have that ability to think on both terms, think poetically and also think literally. Because what good is a metaphor without the root word that it's metaphoric of, right? If I say the church was built on this rock, do I really believe that it's a rock? No, the people are the church. The people are the rock, right? You have to understand both to know the metaphor. You must understand the literal, but you cannot let the literal get in your way of understanding the message, which is almost always the metaphor. In fact, Daniel, at this point, when I look at all of history and all of the teachings that I've ever looked at, the only ones I can really learn from are the poetic ones, the metaphors, the stories that have been passed down from generation to generation, because they're not trying to tell you facts. They're trying to tell you allegory, trying to tell you moral stories. They're not telling you that this happened and therefore this must exist. They're telling you, the great wolf jumped over the moon in order to save this, and it's a ridiculous story, and we remember ridiculous things, and it's a story told to express a moral truth, a law, if you will. And that is what I am finding, is when you uncover the metaphor, you find the literal, or you uncover the literal and you find the metaphor, that when you put those two together, and you understand so intimately what it's trying to say, you understand that there is no true history. No, there is no history. I cannot point to you to any book right now and say that is history. I can't prove history. No one can prove history. If I tell you the story of my life, I'm going to admit certain embarrassing moments. I am going to not tell you a lot of shit that I did as a kid, and I don't want you to know. There's a lot of history that it will never be known, it cannot be known, and it cannot be told, because history is always from the eyes of the victor, it's never real. But we can take these beautiful stories, these beautiful metaphors and allegories, and we can learn so much from them if we allow ourselves to come out of the public, out of the civil, out of the form without substance, right? We must overcome this language barrier so that we can understand both sides, the literal and the metaphoric, because one is useless without the other.
Exactly. I think it's hard for people to grasp sometimes, because when they're right in it and they're functioning in it, they don't know anything else. And then if I'm talking that there's another side, staying in the wrong is never going to correct the error. If I'm in the error, I got to get out of the error. So, and the whole message that was even in the New Testament was dealing with error. It said those that live in error. It talked about what would happen to these that actually followed that or lived in error. What's going to be very good about the conference, and we decided, okay, just so we got the audience there listening, the ones that will tap in on it, the conference will deal with basically this error that people have not seen, and the fact that what we're going to explain in that conference, or what's going to be explained there, is something probably most people have never heard before and have never been able to see the proof of it or the evidence of it. What'll be very unique on this conference that'll be recorded. We were trying to live stream it. I talked with you about that, and we kind of realized unless we're going to be interactive with the live streaming, it's probably more beneficial just to upload it 2 hours later. So we'll most likely upload the recording 2 hours later to make it simpler. So for the time being, we did say that people were going to be able to tap in live streaming. We were going to attempt that, but we think it's probably going to be a lot simpler just to have it recorded. And then basically people have access to it. But what will be in that recording, the knowledge is the gold, not gold. Wisdom is gold.
Yeah.
Truth is gold. Fiction is worthless. It has no substance at all. It's just make-believe. And if you get caught in the make-believe, they will try to make you believe by armed force, because now you're in a contract with lots of labor contractions and labor pains. And you've been induced into labor, but once you become that, the only way you're going to actually set yourself free is based on truth. There's only freedom in truth. There's no freedom in a lie. So when you look at the definitions, and you and I have spoken about this before, which will be dealt with in the conference, here's a very simple thing. I take it out of the Canadian Law Dictionary. I'm sure it's found in other law dictionaries or other, what we call, dictionaries we could use that would at least somewhat describe how a legal system operates. But in the definition of deceive in the Canadian Law Dictionary, it defines it as to induce someone to believe that something which is false is true. In the definition of legal fiction, which is what we operate when we place a legal surname on someone to be a member, to tag them as an economic unit, as a participant in the state, to be property of the state, it defines legal fiction as the assumption of the law that something which is false is true. Well, that's the same thing as to deceive.
Assumption makes an ass out of you and me, huh? To assume. Right.
But they need the consent, because you can't go into the court, because there's also the wording that consent removes mistake. So you can't say it's a mistake if you're consenting to be the mistake.
So stop calling it fraud, people, because it's not fraud if you're benefiting from it.
Exactly. And so that's kind of where we're going to be, I think, clarifying simplicity. We're going to go very, very, very factual and very simplistic on it. And they can look and research for themselves. If there's anything that I say in there that is not able to be validated somewhere, well, they can send in a message to us. But I'm not going to be quoting without being able to back it up.
So let's is there a website for this or just the email?
I think at this stage we have I think on that conference notice, which was and I'll say it before we end the show. I just pulled up. Sorry about it. I should have had it. We have a site that's it's info. I think it's Christian Remedy and Law info, or it's info at Christian Remedy and Law, and so we just kind of like put together a site that actually is now got some good information on it, or good knowledge. That Cambridge University study on the permanent family surname. And if you give me a chance to read what I read to you earlier, I think the other day, I think that would be a great little,
sure.
Great little thing to just let people know of something that's coming in the conference, because we gave it as a read preliminary for people that would like to attend or listen to the conference, to do a little bit of homework, just do a little bit of research, a little bit of due diligence, kind of bring themselves up to date of what really is happening. And it's not hidden. They're actually, I've actually even put out complete documentation to validate the direction that the state is taking in this artificiality society we live in. So there was a project called Project Surname. And I think people get a chance to look at that. It was about registering the Eskimos or the Inuit. And they were one of the last, I guess, frontiers for, at least in Canada, for the government to set up a registration of, or get them all organized up so they knew where they were. And
by the way, just to be clear, that's what they're doing right now with the entire world population. That's why they're making everybody refugees. That's why they're requiring digital identity for all men by 2030. There's over a billion people that don't have identity yet. And we're all going to have the same system of identity that you're talking about right now. In this case, we're talking about an older case of the Inuit, being basically brought in or given the mark of legal society, legal character.
Yeah, in the Cambridge University study, it brought up the part about when they took the natives into residential schools, which is quite the topic in Canada lately, and they were abused and misused, and some really terrible things done to them. But in that, what they did was the natives never had last names. They never had surnames. It was a foreign concept to them. And so what happened was they would have, once they took the children away from their parents and put them into these residential schools, and just remember, that's not that long ago. So people go, that happened way back when. No, that didn't happen that long ago. And it did happen during the Second World War. And they took these natives. It was the deliberate attempt to make them not real anymore. Okay, not native, not natural. And so what they did was they took them into these schools, and the first thing they did was they cut their hair, took all the native dress they had, and then they put them into these wonderful westernized clothing, and then they started to teach them Catholicism, which was 90% of these residential schools were run by Roman Catholics. And so under that abuse, they would have the child walk up to a blackboard, and he had to choose Anglo surname. Went right up to the board and picked one. Said, go up there and pick one. That's how you're going to be known now. Now you're the property of the state. So they did this. So instead of having a native name, now they got an alternative name. An alternative name. Now that's not their real name. That's an alternative name. But it's not a native name. So with the Inuit, it was they were the last ones to get attacked, and there is on the net, you can look up Project Surname, and I'll just read you one little passage out of the Cambridge article. It dealt with the Inuits and how they were trying to deal with them. It says, the intention of the administrators, the ones who were trying to rope in the cattle, bring them all into one ring, it said, the intention of the administrators was that each Inuit would wear his or her disc, which was an identifying number they wore around their neck as a necklace so they would know who this native was. And it says they would wear an identifying disc on a necklace. In fact, they were manufactured with a hole stamped in them for this purpose. Analogies with the military dog tag system were not implicit but quite conscious. The 1935 proposal noted that, and this is the quote of the one that was administrating, my humble suggestion would be that at each registration the child be given an identity disc along the same lines as an Army identity disc and the same insistence that it be on at all times. The novelty of it would appeal to the natives. And further it said, nor is the analogy superficial. The military dog tag, like the hospital identification bracelet, is worn on the body precisely to identify someone who cannot or will not identify himself. It identified the dead or unconscious soldier, well, that's what they are when they become one, or the one whose remains are otherwise unidentifiable. The Inuit disc, like the military dog tags, was invented as a device for outsiders to keep track in the face of muteness, death, or willful resistance of the people or objects so ordered. Not expected to speak for themselves, the fugitive hunting and trapping Inuit were to be branded like migratory birds so as to track their movements. Had the technology of the age permitted, there is little doubt that the officials would have preferred small electronic transmitters and global positioning systems to monitor all movements by satellite. This is the state government.
Wait a minute. I don't wear my phone around my neck, but isn't that the same thing?
It has the same thing, doesn't it? And because you're considered a threat, they want to monitor the cell. Because you're really in a prison with the name, and in order to be in a compound, you need two names. So they give you a compound name.
Well, you need to be the aspect here is that you're mixing reality with fiction. That's the most important part, is that you're putting your first name, your Christian name, your God-given gift name, and you're mixing it with something that is of Satan, which means something that is adversarial to nature or God, right? So you're mixing that which is real with that which is fiction. It's that simple. And if you take all, being a science fiction movie nerd myself, if you take that and you look at some of these movies like The Matrix, when you said identity disc, the first thing I thought of was Tron. Do you remember Tron? For God's sake, you had the users and the computer programs that were in the computerized world were the programs, right? That's why I opened my show when I didn't today. Greetings, programs. I always open my show with that verse, greetings programs, because that's what the user says to the programs in Tron. I think it's hilarious. Most people probably have no idea what I'm saying when I say it, but it's hilarious. And so you have the users, and then their sort of personas that are in the fictional world, right? You can't access the computer world, the fictional world, without a fictional name or fictional title, an avatar, what do you call them? Whatever you call the name that you use on your Skype or on your this or on your that, your email avatar name. Identity, right? That's your identity disc, right? And then the other thing you said that struck me was the remains. And, I've never thought of what that means. What does it mean? So I'm going to look for the dog tag of a soldier on his remains. Well, that means the remains of what's left after his life has been extinguished, right? His true life. And that's going to tell me what the fiction that was attached, because the fiction no longer exists because the physical body doesn't exist. There's no master for the puppet anymore, right? So we take the tag, and now we have the identity disc, or the identity of which we have gotten from the remains. Well, that's what remains of the true self, right? And you're taking the fiction, the tag from the remains, so you can identify what is of the remains. You can identify the fiction that was attached to it. I mean, you think about this, Daniel, what you just read. This is the most disturbing. If it doesn't affect people like it affects us, I don't know why that is.
Yeah.
You can't argue with it. You can't, this is what they did to the Indian people all over the place. Similar stuff. It's disgusting. It's really, really vile, and it is exactly, not ironically, every aspect of it is what the Bible, i.e. the natural law, warns against.
I had a very disturbing, I think, experience, if I want to call it, as about as disturbing as I could have, watching a program. There's a program, I'll just say it was an episode of a show, and I wish I could tell you when, and I can only tell you roughly when I watched it. It was somewhere, I would say probably somewhere between 2002 to 2005. I happened to be home on a Sunday, and I was watching what they call the Canadian broadcast station, and they were covering a very strange situation that happened during the Second World War, and it was dealing with very much about this Project Surname that started, I think, around 1935, but it kind of got its label, I think, later in the 70s. But the program, or the episode that was on the air, I was very intrigued that they had exposed something. I never saw it again. I don't even know where it is, and probably the archive's gone, maybe you can't even get it now. But it dealt with the fact that the Canadian government had gone in and moved a whole area of Inuit, or what we would think to be Eskimos, but we'll say Inuit people, off of their areas where they were living for who knows how long, living off the land, no government intervention at all. And they took them during the Second World War when people weren't even aware of it. It wasn't on the news. And they moved them to an isolated area that was so uninhabitable that they built steel buildings for them, and they had to have icebreakers come in and deliver foods to them, like welfare, in cans, and bring them supplies because there was nothing they could do in this spot they moved them to. For whatever reason, why they moved them off the location, there probably was something going on, who knows, maybe oil exploration or something, but they moved them. And then they found out that these little communities that they had built with steel buildings, everybody was disappearing, and eventually suicide had occurred. These Inuit had basically walked to their death in the elements most of the time, poorly clothed, and they found entire ghost towns, so to speak, of these new settlements that they had established after they moved them from where they used to live. When they went into the manifest of the ships that were bringing in the supplies, one of the interesting things they found on the ship was actually paint thinner. And they realized there was nothing for these Inuit people to paint. The buildings were all steel. They realized they had trained them to inhale paint thinner. So what was happening was they were inhaling it and then walking off in a stupor into the Arctic conditions, and they just died. So entire communities disappeared based on, I guess, being intoxicated on this paint thinner.
I suppose you could say that's what they're doing to us. Here's crystal meth, which is just household chemicals. Here's, opiates turned into heroin. Here's this.
Absolutely. I mean, they're installing it into the population, and then they go, by the way, we're going to penalize the guys selling it. We'll make a business of the guys that are selling this thing, but we're actually supplying them the very thing that they're selling.
Yeah, well, you can call it what it is. It was genocide. I mean, let's not fool ourselves into thinking that, what we call our property today, which we know now is not our property, it's the property of the state, was first the property of, or at least they believed it was the spiritual property of God, which they would claim, right? So, I mean, property, there's no such thing as property because, one of the things I've been so fascinated lately with is the concept of time, and that the Bible says be timeless, essentially, that you should not be born or have a death in that time domain, that you should be timeless, and that your bloodline is for all intents and purposes, your immortality, and that all fiction must have a time. The people, quote unquote, the people of England or the people of America or the people of they didn't exist until a certain point in time. There were no people. The people is a falsity. It's not a real word. It's not a real thing, right? To say it generally is okay, but to say the people of this or the people of that had to be created at some time by men. And there again, we're identifying ourselves as that. So the Inuit people or the Canadian people came and destroyed the Inuit people, and right, because of these time-based calendric things that don't exist, and yet we give them power, we give them respect against the law. Don't respect artificial persons, which is what a people is. Right? It's a corporation, a body corporate. And I find that to be a fascinating concept, that one of our big problems is that we're living in a time domain that is, again, a concept of man. We don't need man's calendars to know what time of year it is, or the planting season. We have the sun, we have the moon, we have all the information that has been passed along through generations, but instead we've been put into this artificial time structure, even a deviant time schedule, because they're still, their calendars they're in the year 5778 or whatever it is, which is based on the creation of the earth, as they say, 6,000 years old. We're in the time after Christ, which started 2,000 years ago, right? So we're in an alternative timeline from them, whoever they are. So it's just fascinating to contemplate the notion that without time, without this concept of registration that we keep hitting on, there's nothing. There is no history. There is no person. There is no people. There is no country. There is no nation without a epoch, a beginning in time. That's fascinating to me, because that means that none of this stuff actually truly can be said to be of God or of nature. And we have to learn to recognize that above all else.
Well, you remember, time is a concept. So, the aristocracy, one of their slang, I guess, renderings of what they were, those that ran, the elite that ran things, they were called a timocracy. So they run everything on time. In other words, I'm going to give you time on everything, time and credit to pay for things. Okay. Time and credit. So in other words, hey, Clint, I'd love you to have time using something that doesn't belong to you, because I know I'm going to benefit from it, so I give you time. So it's time to use, for the use of debt.
Yeah, a contract. A contract
Exactly.
doesn't exist without time. If I give you a speeding ticket and I don't put a time for you to pay it, are you going to pay it?
And they know they're going to win, and that's why even though it says on every ticket, 15 days, but in reality it's 30 days, they just put 15 just to motivate you to move on the speeding ticket you got.
What's a day? Who says what a day is? That's the thing. They have to define all these terms of time,
Yeah.
right?
So they try everybody. It's a try all, okay?
Well,
so they give you a free 30-day trial offer to try to outwit them while you're stuck on the sticky flypaper with the very thing that said you already agreed to be liable to pay the fine.
Well, wait a minute now. When the Bible says a day, it means its definition in the old language is an age.
Right.
So wait a minute. How many is 15 ages? Can you? Right?
Exactly.
So it's just the whole thing is it doesn't have any foundation in reality. That's the beautiful thing about this, is that this is why we call it fictions of law. The very construct that everything is built on is this fiction we call the time domain, or the calendric, the Roman calendar, the romantic, the lie of God's creation, which is that anything but right now is what is real. Like history or the past, the present, the future can be anything but, yeah, it's just, I find that to be just so dang fascinating,
So you follow it and you realize there's conception and then there's misconception, okay? So what happens is, if you don't know who you are and you are allowing a supposition or an accusation or a legal fiction by consent to be attached to you, and you're willing to be the surety of something foreign to truth by taking on a make-believe and imagination of men, you're going to basically bear that debt. And so there's no remedy while I'm in the very thing energizing the very problem. Right. And so the problem is I want you to be so caught up in that contract, not a covenant. People mix up covenant with contract. The contract always needs the word agreed at the end. And when that happens, there's greed involved, which is gain. And gain was the Syriac word for mammon. So you can't have a contract. If it was really going to be fair, you don't need a contract. But someone's going to get the upper hand in the agreement. And you're going to have the contraction pains as the laborer in that contract. And so I was amazed when I looked up the word in Webster's, the word idolater, and what happened in the Webster's that I had access to, that I got with an encyclopedia set, it stated that the word idolater meant hired servant wages.
And in a company store, right? I mean, because...
Exactly. Right? The hireling is the prostitute. It's a legal prostitute. And I admit, I mean, it sounds terrible because I know when I had a discussion with someone on this, and he's, just a friend that helps me on numerous, repairs and stuff around the building I'm in, which I wouldn't get into. But anyways, I was just saying, hey man, I'm only sharing what's there. I'm not trying to claim because you're out there contracting, and legally contracting. But I said, that's what it means. And he goes, so you're trying to tell me I'm an idolater? I said, I didn't write the definition.
Right.
I'm not trying to hurt someone's feelings, but, there's where the problem comes in, because I find the problem is the closer you get to the truth, the harder it is for the average individual, because then they start to get their back up.
Yeah, well,
and then the defense mode comes up. You are shitting now in my non-reality diluted backyard.
I have a chest full of medals that I received from my military quote unquote service, right? And yet I can go and I can see that the word soldier comes from the Roman word for gold, a gold coin, and that it means prostitute. It means mercenary, right? To be a soldier for a standing army like that is to be a mercenary or a prostitute, to prostitute yourself for wages, to kill legally with license by a corporation, basically. So how do you tell that to a soldier who's been brainwashed into thinking that what he does is honorable as he kills, rapes, pillages women and children in other lands? How do you and is paid for that service? Because again, you got to ask: would you do this charitably? Would a priest preach charitably? Would a soldier charitably? Well, they would if they were in the militia. They would if they were protecting their friends, their families, and their people of the states from these central governments that now they prostitute themselves to and call themselves soldiers. You see, it's not offensive. The truth cannot be offensive. The truth can only be defensive, you see, and so if that offends you, the very definition of the word offends you, then you are living in a lie. And that's hard for people to take, just like you said.
Well, I remember someone who's fencing, when we talk that slang word fencing, so of fence, okay, offense, of fence, if I'm fencing something, that's a fencer is someone who steals something or moves something or sells something that's not theirs. That's called a broker. And our whole society works on that idea of brokerage, even though people don't realize they're already broke. If you're already broke, you're broke.
Dude, my favorite word is grocer. You know that one, right?
Yes.
Your friendly neighborhood grocer, which means to get products mark them up at outrageously, illegally high prices and then sell them again, which used to be a crime, a felony that put you in prison. But now
Exactly.
we have our friendly neighborhood grocery stores, the grocer who sticks it to us every day, and now with a license from the state. Well, how did we get to this point? You know?
Well, when you realize that when you're putting a cover up on something, and I take you back to the Genesis, the first time that Adam and Eve sinned, we take it metaphorically or real. They covered up. They covered up. They put something that wasn't natural on their naked bodies. So when I tell you the naked truth, or I say your naked name is your real name, your given name, that's a fact, that's a given. And then the state wants you induced into putting the cover-up name on there. So now you're undercover. You're not real, okay? And now we call that, we call our clothing garb. And then we put garb on, and then we add age, which is opposite to spirituality, which is timeless. When I say something's been made with wood, that's timeless. But when I do something artificial, that's not timeless because it may go out of fashion, right? So basically, man's world of artificial can go out of fashion at any given time. But something that's true and spiritual is timeless. It's infinite. And so we put on garb in the legal world, age. So now we're garbage. And then we look at words that are defined, that were around in 1755 with Samuel Johnson, and he defined a consumer as those who waste and destroy. He basically gave us some indication on where those words meant, but here's the GI original meaning, which is what a soldier is, what we just talked about. And a GI meant government issue. And it originally, in the Army talk, it meant a standard issue garbage can. An enlisted man, especially in the Army. And then it said the term, sometimes after World War I, became standard in World War II to express the civilian soldier's new sense of himself as a piece of disposable government property. Of regular Army non-coms, the ex-civilian was fond of saying he wasn't born, he was issued. I mean, if I could have made this stuff up, Clint, it'd be different. I can't even get this out of my head now.
Like I said you can't apply logic to it. People listen to you think you're crazy you actually believe that's what that word means?
So he said, I'd love to tell you it means something else, but I can't be your brother to tell you the truth if I'm telling you a lie, because I'm not your brother anymore.
I am not your enemy because I tell you the truth. Yeah, he said, Samuel Johnson, 1755, he also said, and you try to tell a pensioner this, they're going to look at you like you're crazy, right? Pension being basically welfare for the middle class. Pension is an allowance made to anyone without an equivalent. In England, it is generally understood to mean pay given to a state hireling for treason to his country.
Absolutely, because the pension idea only led to a treasonous relationship that someone had entered into.
Right. So my dad, my mom is living on my dad's pension. My dad worked for the state and was a prostitute in the military. He actually, when we had his funeral, I actually looked at his medals. And I looked up his medals. He was working for the president and the CIA based on his medals. Right back in Vietnam, back in Korea, he literally was in an elite. He was one of the people hired by the CIA from the military to do all that shit we did overseas. The opium trade and all that shit. He didn't have any kind of honorable career. He was never in any kind of declared war. He literally worked for the CIA and was honored as a soldier of the executive. Right? No. There's nothing to be proud of in his military service. I don't say that with a light heart at all, right? I mean, that's very heavy on me to know what I know and to understand that that's where he comes from. And he's on 100% disability, right? All his medical was covered because of Agent Orange. Monsanto's Agent Orange, which he was exposed to, and it caused all kinds of health problems. That's his military career right there. He got fat, he got diabetes, he got all these different diseases because of Agent Orange exposure and just all around bad health. And he was working for essentially illegally as a hireling, just like Oliver North and all those other soldiers. Right? I mean, that's the true history. They even just made a movie out of this with Tom Cruise, right? So as if it's now common knowledge or something, as if they don't care anymore because the statute of limitations is over or something. I don't know. There's a new movie out about, how all the soldiers and everybody's running drugs for the CIA. And nobody's talking about it. It's just entertainment now. It's just history. And it really pisses me off because that's what my dad was. He was a pension. Now, my mom is getting that pension. An allowance made to anyone without an equivalent pay given to a state hireling. My dad worked for the state in the unemployment office, a state hireling for treason to his country. Do you know how that makes me feel to know the truth? To know the truth.
It's terrible. It is terrible. And it's
terrible, but it's enlightening.
We both experienced something very similar, like when my dad passed. It was funny when he got out of the war, out of the Navy, and he told me when he actually went down a spiritual direction, and he was an unpaid, I'm going to call it an unpaid pastor, an unpaid preacher, which is good because I never saw him get a collection plate money. He never got any. The Protestant organization he belonged to, they didn't give anybody any payments.
Right.
So they just took it all. So those are the guys who are really good at robbing. But anyway, what happened when he basically died physically, the horrible thing about it was that my dad had always spoken to me, and he said that when he saw guys handing out the little poppies in Canada for Remembrance Day, that he was ashamed.
Yeah.
He was ashamed of what he did. He was on a destroyer. And he said he knew that means they destroyed people. They shot missiles and blew people right out of the water.
Destroy infrastructure.
And he said he was ashamed of it. And he said, I was just as party to whatever happened on there, whether I pushed that button to blow someone out of the water. So he would go over to the guys who were sitting there with their medals on, and he'd go right over them and say, hey, man, we were wrong what we did. We should have said no. We were going to be part of this.
Yeah.
We went the wrong way. And he says, and I'm ashamed of it. So I said, I'm just going to tell you, because they would solicit him. He says, look, I did that time. I went in there for that 5-year jaunt and did the diabolical deed and participated in it.
And it was legal.
It was wrong.
It was legal.
It was legal. They had the legal right to kill.
Right. It was okay because it was legal. Hey, Daniel, I know exactly how you feel, man. We've just got a few minutes here, probably less than that. So let's do this one more time. Truth versus fiction of law. Is there any remedy? Saturday, January 13th. That's this coming
And they can
Friday.
email me. They can email me at child144. It's child, CHILD, numbers 144@gmail.com if they're interested and they want us to send them the entire link in case we've missed something somehow and letting them know. And of course, you can fill them in also. They can actually contact you. Either way, we can pass it on. They'll get the full document of what's going to go on in the update. And we'll do the best we can.
Anybody that wants to go, you just send me an email before the 13th, and I'll send you what I've got. 65 Martin Ross Avenue, Unit 1. Side door at North York, Toronto, Ontario. Daniel will be there along with some other speakers. Doors open at noon for a meet and greet and should last till about 6 p.m. And then who knows what you big bunch of drunks will do after that, right? Because, gosh.
I know one thing that will come out of it is that I think that what's going to happen is this will be a regular sharing. And people will definitely have access to knowledge, research that they wouldn't have known, and we're more than happy to provide it.
Let's find a point.
Very nice. Well, that's the music. That means we're done. You're on Fishing Fly Time.
The world is a ride. You think it's real, just run. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. The world is like a ride. You think it's real, just run. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. Tide goes up and down, round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored.